Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I've provided you a slideshow up here, but it's of absolutely no value at all except for to provide you images of the person I'm going to be talking about, because I think if you're going to be talking about someone for 10 minutes, it would probably be handy to know what they look like. So this seminar, as far as I can appreciate, is about transition, how artillery shifts from one operational environment to another and the challenges that that brings. This paper will use Brigadier General Joseph John Talbot Hobbs, as he was 100 years ago, as a lens through which to examine the transitional period as well as to explore aspects of artillery command at this time. Hobbs, as I will refer to him from now on, was CRA 1st Australian Division from 1914 to 1916, and then from 1917 until the armistice, he was General Officer Commanding 5th Australian Division. Although he was an effective divisional commander, as one former AIF officer commented, Hobbs's first love was the artillery, and he remained faithful to guns and gunners until rank and seniority took him to the command of higher formations and to a knighthood at the hands of the King. So, Hobbs was born in London, 1864, and he began his working life as a carpenter, but developed into an architect, moving to Perth, Australia in 1887, and at the age of 23, he was at the bottom rung of the professional ladder. He was a hard-working and dedicated architect who achieved professional and commercial success. In 1905, he set up the firm Hobbs, Smith and Forbes, in which he was a senior partner. Of his military career, he was a committed citizen soldier. In his teens, he had joined the 14th Battery 1st Cinque-Ports Artillery Volunteers in Britain, and once he arrived in Australia, he joined the Volunteer Field Artillery in Perth as a gunner. In 1889, he received his commission. By 1897, he was a major. In 1903, he commanded the 1st West Australian Field Battery. In 1906, his expertise expanded when he was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel to command the West Australian Mixed Brigade. From 1906 to 1912, he was a staff officer for the Army Engineering Services, and then in 1913, he was a colonel commanding the 22nd Infantry Brigade Citizen Forces. Not only did he get a broad spectrum of experience in these pre-war years, but he also underwent significant training and education, heading to the UK 4 times at his own expense to attend training courses or to be attached to the British Army. He's someone who invested heavily in what he did. At the outbreak of the war, he was easily the best choice to command the 1st Australian Division's artillery. He held this appointment throughout the Gallipoli campaign and even temporarily commanded the division in October. At the start of November, he was removed from Gallipoli, suffering dysentery, a decision which he fought against to no avail, and returned once the division was in Egypt on the 27th of January, and the following day he resumed command of 1st Divisional Artillery. During the following period, from his return in January to, say, June, July, and the 1st Division's entrance into the Battle of the Somme, he faced organisational and tactical problems, many of which we've heard in the past two papers. And the way he handled these tells us much about his capability as a commander. Organisationally, artillery in the AIF was expanding to bring it in line with new army divisions. This meant that Hobbs's 3 brigades, 3 batteries, had to become 3 brigades of 4 batteries plus a brigade of howitzers, as we've just heard. This presented a whole lot of problems, one being that many of his 18-pounders had been left on Gallipoli, so they were behind the ball even before they were required to expand. And in addition to increasing their own number of guns, the AIF needed to find guns for the newly raised 4th and 5th Divisions as well. A problem that was more specific to Hobbs was the issue of finding personnel. 1st Divisional Artillery had the most experienced gunners in the AIF, and to help raise the 4th and 5th Divisional Artilleries, some of Hobbs's men needed to form the nucleus of these new divisions. What you need to understand about this is that Hobbs, at this point, is the most influential Australian artilleryman in the AIF. And he's the one who's basically determining who goes where. He interviews potential officers, writes reports for Birdwood and White, makes recommendations, and importantly, he can decide who he wants to release from his division to go to other divisions. This is important because Hobbs is in a position where he needs to balance the wider needs of the AIF with his own needs as a CRA. And probably unsurprisingly, he errs on the latter side of the ledger more often. And I can give you a few examples of that in the discussion afterwards. Basically, though, while he's in Egypt, he's trying to keep 1st Divisional Artillery as strong as possible. And this is helped by the decision to send 1 Anzac Corps to France as soon as possible, meaning that the 1st and 2nd Divisions regain the priority for men and material during the end of their time in Egypt. These personnel issues are important because Hobbs wanted to have capable and experienced gunners under his command, possibly because he anticipated the importance of artillery on the Western Front. Gallipoli had exposed Australian gunners to modern warfare, in a sense, but it was essentially an infantry-dominated campaign where the full potential of artillery was not made evident to the AIF, and it had not allowed gunners to develop their technical skills sufficiently to support a full Western Front battle. Although this problem was worked on in Egypt, Hobbs really made it a priority once the 1st Australian Division went into the line in the Western Front. He oversaw his batteries and his brigades as they trained. He was driving them hard throughout this period, and he was constantly inspecting his batteries when they went into the line as well, I might point out, as taking the time to visit the frontline trenches to get an appreciation of his sector from the infantry's perspective. However, Hobbs was not just training his men, but he was also actively thinking about the challenges of providing effective artillery support in this new environment. Only after having been in France since the end of March, on the 11th of May, he felt confident enough in his knowledge to issue a 16-page paper entitled Artillery in Trench Warfare. This document shows that he is beginning to come to grips with the important relationship between infantry and artillery and how important it is to coordinate those two arms. Right at the start of this document, the first thing he writes is, and I quote, "In an endeavour to prevent misunderstanding arising and to source a close and efficient cooperation with our infantry, I prepared this paper for the instruction and help of the 1st Australian Divisional Artillery. It is hoped that an explanation of the present artillery organisation, its functions and limitations in trench warfare will in some measure be of assistance to officers of both the infantry and artillery, and by helping each to appreciate the objects to be attained and the difficulties to be contended with, tend to assist in establishing and maintaining that spirit of mutual confidence and support so essential to success." End quote. With the fundamental principle being artillery-infantry coordination, Hobbs covers everything that artillery could and could not do in trench warfare, both in attack and in defence, as well as examining the various types of artillery possessed by the modern division, including trench mortars, and he also explains their purpose and their various strengths and weaknesses. Although this document is very much a product of early 1916, you can see that conceptually he understands a lot about the big ideas that play out through the remainder of the war when it comes to the use of artillery. He understands that its role in a trench warfare battle was, I quote, "to prevent the enemy manning his trenches and placing his machine guns in position before our infantry can reach the hostile parapet," end quote. So in this sense, he's emphasising neutralisation over destruction. Importantly, he was aware of the problems associated with a linear lifting barrage that Garth mentioned in his paper, which moved from one line to the next, back and back. Instead of this, Hobbs noted, quote, "A sudden lift of all artillery fire is objectionable, as it informs the enemy when the assault is taking place. There should be no pause in the firing line, and the batteries should lift only a short distance at a time," end quote. Here, he seems to be preempting the evolution of the creeping barrage, the more fluid forward motion of the barrage rather than the sort of the static lifting motion. And he can certainly see the justification for moving from one system or one methodology to the other. The point, I guess, I would like to make here is that Hobbs is a thinking and intellectual soldier, and this really comes across in this document. He says much more about it, and I'm happy to cover that in the discussion later on. So Talbot Hobbs was by no means an expert in trench warfare artillery by the Battle of the Somme. How can he be? He's only just arrived on the Western Front, and his involvement has been limited largely to trench raids. He's not experienced the full intensity of a divisional-sized Western Front battle. Yet, when faced with a number of different challenges during this period, he handles them reasonably well and produced a divisional artillery that went into the Western Front on the Somme and fought reasonably capably. I do not want to suggest in any sense that Hobbs is unique. There are undoubtedly other artillery commanders, both inside and in the wider British Army, that were doing the same sorts of things and thinking the same sorts of things to a lesser or greater degree. However, in his position, he was very influential in the AIF's artillery development. He gives us a lens through which to view the role and the influence of the CRA. I'd argue this developed through Hobbs's pre-war career, which stamped him out as a man of significant capability both in military and civilian spheres, and this came to fruition during the war. As one biographer commented, quote, "Chance had little to do with the success that has come the way of this distinguished soldier and citizen," end quote. He was a man who invested in soldiering and invested in what he was doing and what he was being asked to do. And I would argue that that investment was returned when needed, and that was seen in 1916, 1917 and 1918.